July 22nd, 1934, 10:30 at night, Chicago, Illinois. The air outside the Biograph Theater on 2433 North Lincoln Avenue was thick with summer heat, the kind that sticks to your shirt and clouds your thinking. John Dillinger stepped through the lobby doors after watching Clark Gable die on a movie screen in Manhattan melodrama. He had a straw hat tilted low, a pair of wire-rimmed glasses, a loaded automatic in his right pocket. He walked maybe 20 feet down the sidewalk before Melvin Purvis lit a cigar. That was the signal. FBI agents stepped out of the shadows. Dillinger reached for the pistol. He never cleared the pocket. 5 shots cracked through the night outside the theater. 3 of them found him. 2 tore through his body, and 1 struck the back of his neck and exited just under his right eye. He pitched forward onto the pavement, blood pooling, bystanders screaming. Minutes later, in a back room at a nearby hospital, the most hunted man in America was pronounced dead at 31 years old. This wasn't just some bank robber. This was the man who humiliated J. Edgar Hoover, the man who broke out of an escape-proof jail with a wooden gun he carved himself, the man whose gang hit bank after bank across the Midwest and walked away laughing every time. Newspapers called him public enemy number 1. Farmers in Indiana called him a hero. The FBI called him the reason their entire agency had to be reinvented. This is the story of how a poor kid from Indianapolis became the most famous outlaw in American history, how he turned bank robbery into theater, how he made the federal government look like fools, and how 1 woman, 1 phone call, and 1 movie ticket ended everything in less than 90 seconds. But here's what Hollywood never told you. Dillinger wasn't running from the FBI that night. He thought he had them beat. He thought he'd vanished. He had no idea the woman walking right next to him in the orange skirt had already sold him out for $5,000 and a shot at staying in the country. That's where this story really begins. John Herbert Dillinger was born June 22nd, 1903, in Indianapolis, Indiana. His father owned a small grocery store on the south side of the city and a handful of rental properties he managed himself. The family wasn't rich. They weren't poor, either. They were the kind of working-class people who went to church on Sunday and paid their bills on time. John's mother died when he was 3. That changed him. His father remarried 6 years later, but the boy never connected. He was quiet around adults, wild around other kids. He started shoplifting young, stealing coal from rail yards as a teenager, picking fights with anyone who looked at him sideways. His father moved the family to Mooresville, Indiana, when John was 16, hoping the country air would settle him down. It didn't. He dropped out of school, joined the Navy in 1923, deserted a few months later because he hated taking orders, came home, married a 16-year-old girl named Beryl Hovius, and tried to live straight for about a year. Then, in September of 1924, John Dillinger made the decision that would define his entire life. He was 21 years old, broke, angry. A guy named Ed Singleton, a friend from the local pool hall, told him he had a plan. A grocer named Frank Morgan walked home every Saturday night with the day's cash. They'd jump him on the street. Quick money, no witnesses, no risk. Dillinger agreed. They botched it. Morgan fought back. Dillinger hit him with a bolt wrapped in a handkerchief. The grocer survived. The cops arrested Dillinger that same week. His father told him to plead guilty and throw himself on the mercy of the court. Big mistake. The judge gave him 10 to 20 years. Singleton, who fought the charge, got 2. That sentence didn't just imprison Dillinger. It built him. He started at the Indiana State Reformatory in Pendleton, where he met 2 men who would shape his future, a cold, careful planner named Harry Pierpont and a fast, reckless gunman named Homer Van Meter. When they were transferred to the tougher Indiana State Prison at Michigan City, Dillinger requested a transfer to join them, and it was there, at Michigan City, that the crew came together. Charles Makeley, the smooth talker, a former cigar salesman turned career thief. Russell Clark, the muscle. John Hamilton, a steady Canadian hand. They studied bank floor plans the way other prisoners studied scripture. They drew up routes. They timed their imaginary scores down to the second. They told Dillinger one thing over and over again. When you get out, don't waste time on grocery stores. Banks have money. Banks have insurance. Nobody dies, and the cops barely chase you. Roughly 9 years. That's how long Dillinger sat behind bars, learning. By the time he walked out on May 22nd, 1933, his father had begged for a parole, gathering signatures from more than 100 neighbors, and even the prosecutor who put him away. The country was different now. The Great Depression had gutted America. Banks had failed by the thousands. Families were starving. Farmers were losing land to the same banks that took their savings. And Dillinger walked back into that world with a head full of plans and a heart full of rage. He hit his first bank just 19 days later. June 10th, 1933, New Carlisle, Ohio, the National Bank. Dillinger and a couple of accomplices walked out with $10,600 in cash. He worked it like a script. No yelling, no panic. He told the teller exactly what to do, kept eye contact, and was gone in minutes. The local paper said the robber was polite. That word would follow him for the rest of his life. Polite, charming, almost gentle. People who watched him work said he tipped his hat to women on his way out the door. But here's the thing. Dillinger wasn't just robbing banks. He was running a project. Every score went into a war chest. That war chest had one purpose: break Pierpont, Makeley, Clark, and the rest of his prison brothers out of Michigan City. He hit bank after bank that summer. Montpelier, Indiana, Bluffton, Ohio, Indianapolis, where the state bank job alone paid out $25,000. He used the money to bribe guards and smuggle 3 pistols into the prison, hidden inside a barrel of thread delivered to the shirt shop where the inmates worked. On September 26, 1933, Pierpont, Makeley, Clark, and 7 other convicts pulled those guns, took the deputy warden hostage, and walked out of Michigan City. 10 of the most dangerous men in the Midwest, free, because of John Dillinger. The irony? Dillinger himself had been arrested 4 days earlier in Dayton, Ohio. He was sitting in a jail cell when his crew broke free. So Pierpont returned the favor. On October 12, 1933, Pierpont and 3 others walked into the Lima, Ohio jail, told the sheriff they were there to transfer Dillinger, and when Sheriff Jess Sarber asked to see their credentials, they shot him. Sarber died that evening. Dillinger walked out a free man. The first Dillinger gang was born. What followed was one of the most aggressive bank robbery campaigns the United States had ever seen. Between October of 1933 and January of 1934, the gang hit banks across the Midwest. Greencastle, Indiana, $75,000, one of the biggest single hauls of his career. Racine, Wisconsin, $27,000. East Chicago, Indiana, $20,000. They moved like a military unit. Dillinger handled the floor and the customers. Pierpont covered the door. Makeley worked the vault. They wore bulletproof vests stolen from police arsenals in Auburn and Peru, Indiana. They carried Thompson submachine guns. They knew the back roads of 3 states by heart. They'd switch cars on every getaway, hiding stashes in barns owned by farmers who were paid in cash and asked no questions. The American public ate it up. You have to understand the moment. 1933, 1 in 4 men out of work. Banks foreclosing on family farms. Children starving in cities that had been booming 5 years before. And here came this charming, smiling bandit knocking over the same banks that had ruined so many lives. Newspapers ran his picture on the front page. Women sent him love letters. Songs were written about him. He wasn't just a criminal anymore. He was a symbol. J. Edgar Hoover saw it differently. Hoover was running an agency most Americans had never heard of. The Bureau of Investigation. No power to cross state lines. No authority to make arrests in most jurisdictions. His agents weren't even allowed to carry guns without special permission. Hoover needed a war. A villain big enough to justify expanding his bureau into the kind of federal police force he'd been demanding for years. When Dillinger started crossing state lines after every robbery, Hoover finally had his ticket. He put a young, sharp-dressed agent named Melvin Purvis in charge of the Chicago field office and told him one thing: get Dillinger, by any means, whatever it costs. But before Purvis could close in, Dillinger walked into the biggest disaster of his career. East Chicago, Indiana. January 15th, 1934. The First National Bank. The gang took $20,000. But on the way out, a police officer named William Patrick O'Malley stepped in front of Dillinger with his revolver drawn. He fired. The bullet struck Dillinger's bulletproof vest. Dillinger raised his Thompson submachine gun and cut O'Malley down. The officer died on the bank steps. He left behind a wife and children. That was the murder charge that would follow Dillinger to the grave. It was the only homicide ever formally charged against him, though the gang's body count by then was much higher. 8 days later, the gang made another mistake. They drove to Tucson, Arizona for a winter break. A fire broke out at the hotel where some of them were hiding. Firefighters helped carry their luggage down. The luggage was suspicious, heavy, clinking. The firefighters recognized faces from a detective magazine. Within 72 hours, the entire core of the gang was in custody. Pierpont, Makeley, Clark, Dillinger. All four arrested without a shot fired. The Arizona cops were heroes. Dillinger was extradited back to Indiana to stand trial for the murder of Officer O'Malley. They put him in the Lake County Jail at Crown Point, Indiana. The sheriff, Lillian Holly, told reporters her facility was escape-proof. Guardsmen surrounded the building. Reporters lined up to photograph the famous prisoner. Dillinger smiled for the cameras, even put his arm around the prosecutor for a now famous photograph. A few weeks later, on March 3rd, 1934, he walked out the front door. Here's how it happened. And this is where it gets interesting. Dillinger carved a piece of wood into the shape of a pistol. He blackened it with shoe polish. On the morning of March 3rd, he held that wooden gun on a guard during routine breakfast service. He locked guard after guard and trustee after trustee in cells, one by one. He walked into the warden's office, took 2 real Thompson submachine guns from the rack, grabbed a hostage, and walked out the front door. He stole Sheriff Holly's brand-new Ford Vate and drove away, free, again. The humiliation was complete. Sheriff Holly resigned in disgrace within weeks. And Dillinger? He made one critical mistake. He drove that stolen sheriff's car across the state line from Indiana into Illinois. That was federal. Driving a stolen car across state lines violated a federal law, and that gave Hoover his opening. The Bureau finally had jurisdiction, and the manhunt went national. Purvis got the green light to use any tactic necessary. Wiretaps, informants, lethal force, the rules were off. Months later, on his 31st birthday in June of 1934, John Dillinger would be officially branded the FBI's first public enemy #1, with a $10,000 reward on his head. But for now, Dillinger was already gone. He drove to Chicago, reunited with his girlfriend, a quiet half-French, half-Menominee woman named Evelyn Frichette, called Billy by everyone who knew her. She was dark-eyed, soft-spoken, and absolutely loyal. She'd been working as a hat-check girl when she met Dillinger in the fall of 1933. She knew exactly what he did for a living. She didn't care. She later wrote that he was the only man who ever made her feel like she mattered. Dillinger built a new crew that spring. Homer Van Meter was still loose. So was John Hamilton. He brought in a vicious gunman from Chicago named Lester Gillis, better known as Babyface Nelson, barely in his mid-20s, 5 feet 4 inches tall, and one of the most violent men in American organized crime. Nelson loved killing lawmen. Dillinger didn't trust him, but he needed gunmen, and Nelson was available. The second Dillinger gang hit the Security National Bank of Sioux Falls, South Dakota, on March 6, 1934. Nearly $50,000. They hit the First National Bank of Mason City, Iowa, on March 13th, $52,000. Dillinger took a bullet in the shoulder during the Mason City job. He kept running. He went back to Chicago. In late May, He paid underworld doctors to remake his face in a backroom procedure and to burn off his fingerprints with acid. He nearly died on the table from the anesthetic. He thought he was disappearing. He wasn't. On April 9th, 1934, federal agents had grabbed Billy Frechette outside a Chicago tavern. Dillinger had been waiting in the car at the curb. He saw the agents move. He could have driven straight at them. He drove away. He'd never see her again. She got 2 years in federal prison for harboring a fugitive. 2 weeks later came the Little Bohemia disaster, April 22nd, 1934. The gang was hiding at a rural Wisconsin lodge called Little Bohemia in Manitowish waters. A tip came in. Purvis loaded his agents into cars and rushed up from Chicago. They arrived in the evening. They didn't surround the building. They didn't wait. 3 local men walked out of the lodge, getting into a car to leave. The agents thought they were the gang. They opened fire, killed 1 civilian, wounded 2 others. The shooting alerted Dillinger and the gang inside. They slipped out the back into the dark Wisconsin woods. Babyface Nelson killed Special Agent W. Carter Baum at point-blank range during the chaos. The entire gang got away. Every single one. The newspapers crucified Hoover. Congress threatened to dissolve the Bureau. Purvis offered to resign. Hoover refused. He wanted Dillinger alive or dead, but mostly dead. That's when the trap finally started to close. In the summer of 1934, Dillinger was hiding in plain sight on the north side of Chicago, living under the name Jimmy Lawrence. He had a new girlfriend, a waitress named Polly Hamilton. Polly lived with her landlady, a Romanian immigrant named Anna Kumpanas, who went by the American name Anna Sage. Sage ran a brothel on the side. She was facing deportation as an alien of low moral character. She was desperate. In July, Sage figured out who Jimmy Lawrence really was. Dillinger had let his guard down. He'd been going to movies, drinking at neighborhood bars, even strolling past police stations, laughing too loud at his own anonymity. Sage made 1 phone call. She sat down with Melvin Purvis and told him everything. She wanted money. She wanted her deportation case dropped. Purvis promised a cut of the reward. He said he'd do what he could about the deportation, but couldn't guarantee it. Sage agreed anyway. She told him Dillinger was planning to take her and Polly to a movie soon. She'd wear a white blouse and an orange skirt so the agents could spot him in the dark. For days, Purvis waited. He had agents staked out near both possible theaters, the Marlboro and the Biograph. On the evening of July 22nd, Sage made the call. Biograph. Manhattan melodrama. Roughly 20 federal agents, joined by a few East Chicago police officers, fanned out around the Biograph Theater that night. They sweated through their suits in the heat. They watched the marquee. Just after 8:30 in the evening, Dillinger walked up to the ticket window with Polly on one arm and Anna Sage on the other. Sage's orange skirt looked red under the marquee lights. That single detail, an outfit that photographed as red, would create the legend of the woman in red. Dillinger paid for the tickets and went inside. He sat through Manhattan melodrama, 93 minutes of Clark Gable playing a gangster who walks willingly to the electric chair. He came out around 10:30. Purvis lit his cigar. Agents converged. Dillinger sensed something. He reached for the pistol in his right pocket. 3 agents fired, 5 shots in all. 3 found their mark. 1 struck the back of his neck and exited under his right eye, the wound that killed him. He stumbled and fell on the pavement beside the alley next to the theater. He was pronounced dead at 10:50 that night at a nearby hospital, 31 years old. The 3 agents who fired, Charles Winstead, Clarence Hurt, and Herman Hollis, were each commended by Hoover. None of them ever said which one fired the fatal shot, though history has mostly credited Winstead. Within minutes, crowds surged into the alley. People dipped handkerchiefs in his blood. Women collected fragments of his clothing as souvenirs. The body was put on public display at the Cook County morgue, where some 15,000 people filed past in a day and a half. Then it was taken home to Indianapolis, where thousands more lined up before burial in Crown Hill Cemetery. the same grounds where his mother had been buried since his childhood. His casket was eventually encased in concrete to stop souvenir hunters from digging it up. The aftermath rewrote American history. Hoover used Dillinger's death as the foundation of everything the FBI became. Within a year, Congress passed laws giving federal agents the authority to make arrests, carry firearms, and pursue criminals across state lines. The Bureau of Investigation was renamed the Federal Bureau of Investigation in 1935. Purvis became a national celebrity. Hoover, jealous of the attention, pushed him out of the Bureau within about a year and spent the rest of his life ensuring Purvis never got credit. Purvis died in 1960 of a self-inflicted gunshot wound, widely believed to be suicide, with a pistol from his own collection. Anna Sage got her $5,000. The deportation went through anyway. She was sent back to Romania in 1936 and died there of liver disease in 1947, poor and largely forgotten. Polly Hamilton lived quietly under different names until her death in 1969. Billie Frechette served her 2 years, toured briefly, billing herself as Dillinger's lost love, and died in 1969. Babyface Nelson was killed in a shootout with federal agents in November of 1934, 4 months after Dillinger. Homer Van Meter was killed by St. Paul police that August. Pierpont and Makeley were tried and convicted for the murder of Sheriff Sarber. Makeley was shot dead trying to escape the Ohio State Penitentiary with another fake gun, the same trick Dillinger used at Crown Point. Pierpont was electrocuted in October of 1934. The first Dillinger gang was wiped out in barely more than a year. Every single member dead or in prison. Here's what the Public Enemies movie didn't dwell on. The gang's total take across its run is estimated at somewhere between $300,000 and $500,000. Spread across a dozen members over little more than a year. That's not Hollywood money. Dillinger died nearly broke, reportedly with just a few dollars in his pocket when they searched his body. He hadn't gotten rich. He hadn't escaped to Mexico. He hadn't built an empire. He'd run, fought, hidden, and bled his way through one of the most desperate years any American outlaw ever survived. What he did was rewrite the rule book. Before Dillinger, the federal government had no real power to chase criminals. After Dillinger, the FBI became the agency we know today. Before Dillinger, bank robbery was mostly a local crime. After Dillinger, robbing a federally insured bank became a federal offense. Before Dillinger, men thought fingerprints could be burned off and identities erased. After Dillinger, J. Edgar Hoover built a national system to track every felon in America. He wasn't a hero. He killed a police officer with a family waiting at home. He robbed savings from people who had nothing left to save. He pulled men into a life that put nearly every one of them in a grave before they grew old. But he wasn't just a villain either. He was a Depression-era kid with no education, no options, and no patience, who decided the only way out was through. He picked banks because banks had taken everything from the people he came from. He picked partners because partnership was the only family he had left after his mother died and his father gave up on him. And in the end, he picked the wrong theater on the wrong night to watch a movie about a gangster walking to his own execution. The real story behind Public Enemies isn't the gunfire. It isn't the bank vaults. It isn't even the woman in the orange skirt. The real story is this. A federal agency was built on the corpse of one polite, smiling thief from Indianapolis. And every time the FBI raids a house, taps a phone, or hunts a fugitive across state lines today, they're using powers that were forged in the alley behind the Biograph Theater on the night of July 22nd, 1934. That's the real cost of John Dillinger. If you found this story fascinating, hit subscribe. We drop a new mob and gangster documentary every week. Drop a comment below. Was Dillinger a Depression-era folk hero, or just a killer with good public relations? Tell us what you really think.